So, if you're watching this video, that means you are ready to start your sewing project. So, before you begin, ignore this because I already started one. Before you begin, you need to have your plastic grid and you need to have your basic outline drawn on it with a Sharpie, okay? Super simple outline, don't overcomplicate it. So you need this with your design drawn on it. You need a yarn needle and you need a piece of yarn. So when you are sewing, you need to cut your yarn off first. So do not leave your giant piece of yarn attached to your yarn ball, okay? You need to cut it off. And please do not make your piece of yarn 85 feet long. Like this is plenty, okay? Because when it gets super long, it's gonna get super tangled, okay? So a relatively short piece of yarn. Do not make it the length of the Empire State Building, all right? Short piece of yarn, needle, plastic grid. Okay, so when you are ready to start sewing, you have all those things. The first thing you need to do is thread the yarn through your needle. So it's kind of tricky. So I'm going to show you the easiest way to do it. So you're going to get to the end of your yarn and you're going to fold it down like this. And then you're going to pinch it all the way to the top. Okay, so there's just a little tiny bit of yarn sticking out. I'm pinching it all the way to the top. And then I can take my needle and the eye of my needle and I'm going to just carefully kind of wiggle the needle onto the yarn and pull it through. Okay, that is the easiest way. Next thing you can do is take your yarn on your needle and just tie one knot, like you're tying a knot in your shoelaces. So I'm going to take my strings, I'm going to twist them, and then I'm going to take the tail of my yarn and stick it through the loop, okay? Don't double knot it, just one knot is fine, okay? And this will make sure that your yarn doesn't come off your needle. And now you're ready to start sewing. So when you start sewing, you are always going to start from the back of your plastic grid. So you know that it's the back because the back is the side that you did not draw on. So I have drawn on this side. This is my front. This is my back, okay? So I'm always going to start by taking my needle and going, I'm going to start over here actually, change my mind. I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go through the back of my plastic grid, okay? And then I'm going to pull it almost all the way through, but leave a little tail at the end, okay? So now I've put my yarn through my plastic grid and my yarn is coming through the front, okay? I need to go back down through a neighbor box. So here's where my yarn is coming out. I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go back down through the box next door, not the same box, the box next door, and I'm going to pull this all the way through, okay? So now I have my tail that I just left, and then my really long piece of yarn attached to my needle, okay? I'm going to take these two pieces of string, and I'm going to tie them, and I'm going to double knot this one, 2 knots, okay? And now this is secure, so it's not going to come off of my plastic grid. Okay, so now you can start filling in space. You can see that I've already started it here. When I made my plan, I decided that I wanted my directional lines to go across the slope of my mountain. So that's the direction I'm going to sew in. You do not have to only sew vertically or only sew horizontally. You can go at an angle, okay? So I'm going to start sewing. My yarn is coming through the back, which means I need to go back up through the back. If my yarn is coming out of the back of my plastic grid and I go down through the front, all that's going to do is it's going to take my piece of yarn and it's going to wrap it around the side of my grid. Okay, do we see what's happening here? I don't want that. I need to make sure that if my string is coming out the back, I need to take my needle and go back up through the back, okay? And I can start sewing. So my yarn is right here right now. I don't have to go one box at a time. So I'm going to jump down to this section and I'm going to pull it all the way through. And now I can take my yarn or my needle and I can go back down through where I previously was. So I started sewing all the way up here and now my string is all the way down here, okay? But I can jump back and go through previous boxes. I'm going to pull this through. And now you can see that I've made a stitch. Oh, I've made a stitch right here, okay? Right here. And it's starting to fill up the space. So I'm just going to keep sewing. My string is on the back, so I have to go through the back. And I'm going to jump. Can you see my needle? I'm going to jump down here this time. I'm going to pull it through. And then I'm going to go back to the previous box where I was before. Okay, so my yarn is coming out the front, so I have to go back down through the front. And I'm going to pull it all the way through. And I've just made these 2 stitches right here, and see how I'm starting to fill up this space, okay? So you do not want to see any of this plastic grid showing. So I'm doubling up, I'm crossing over, I'm covering, okay? So you can go back through boxes you've already sewn in, you can go at different angles, but you want to get all this covered up so you don't see any of this plastic grid, okay? All right, so that is how you start sewing your project. When you are finished with the color, let's say I've sewn with all my gray thread and I'm done now. I'm going to take my extra tail from when I started my yarn, and I'm going to take my yarn that I'm sewing with. I'm going to tie these together into a double knot. So 1 knot, 2 knot, and then I can take my scissors and I can trim both of these off, okay? And then I would start a new piece of yarn. So that is how you finish it, so that way it doesn't come unraveled. Oh, upside down. Okay, so this is what you need to do once you have your sketches done, you've got your outline on here, then you can start sewing.